morning, everybody. Welcome to Fusion Mobility, a systemic approach for a connected and human future mobility. I'm Giulia Cortesi, the moderator of this science session. Let me give you an overview. We will start with 3 keynotes by Francesca Raccioppi, by Manfred Neuen, and by Sven Kesselring. Then, a panel with 6 international speakers. Finally, a question and answers for the entire session. Please send all your questions to us from the beginning of the session using the chat, the green button you can see on the right of the screen. And our facilitator, Laurent Darcy, will collect all your questions and will present them. Now, let's immediately start with the first keynote. It's a wonderful video by Francesca Raccioppi from the World Health Organization, and she is head of the WHO European Center for Environment and Health. Please.
Trieste. Good morning, Trieste. I'm delighted to be with you in this city that is very special to my heart. My mother's family lived there in Via San Nicolò for decades, and my mother and my father happened to meet for the first time in Piazza dell'Unità, so you can understand that this place has a special place, is very special to my family. So, but also being with you virtually takes us really at the core of what we are going to discuss today. Over the past few months, we have been forced to rethink every aspect of our life. The way we live, we work, we study, we love each other, and relate to each other personally and professionally. So we have the idea of a new normal is emerging from this experience, and we cannot think of this new normal to be a moving back to how it was. There is no coming back. We have rather to see how we are going to be able to move forward. And sustainable mobility, intertwined with urban planning, is at the core of this discussion. So what I will try to do will be to recap a bit of the evidence that we have of physical activity and health, sustainable mobility and health, and then moving into why it has become so prominent during the COVID-19 crisis, and finally, what can we do about moving forward in this new context from a policy perspective. Now, we are in Italy, and I wish to start with a tribute to a great medical doctor, Girolamo Mercuriale. Girolamo, in his Treatise on the Art of Gymnastics in the 16th century, had already identified walking as one of the activities that provide good health. He couldn't mention cycling for the simple reason that the bicycle was yet to be invented, but I'm sure he would have done it had he known about bicycles. So today we can admire his intuitions and his observations, but it is a matter of fact that it took 4.4 centuries before scientists were able to start understanding better and quantify the links between physical activity and health. And it is now, thanks to these efforts, that we know a lot, much more now, also about being physically active through cycling and walking and having good health effects. For example, we know that if we were meeting the WHO guidelines of 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week by walking or cycling on a regular basis, then we would obtain a reduction on the total mortality risk of approximately 10–11%. This is very big, it is very big indeed, And it is because of this magnitude that even when we take into account the risks that are increasing when people are walking and cycling, particularly the risk of injuries and the risk of being exposed to higher air pollution, particularly while cycling, well, still in that case, the benefits outweigh the risks. By how much? In some studies that we have seen, for example, the meta-analysis that you see on the screen, this has been put at 9-1 in terms of benefits to disbenefits ratio. It is very important. And we know that this holds true also when we are factoring in relatively high levels of air pollution. That doesn't mean that air pollution is not important, quite the opposite. It means that cycling and walking is so great that we need to improve and make an effort to improve air quality so that its benefits can be delivered in full. And active mobility, together with the public transport, is also an excellent policy to mitigate climate change, as it is the combination of policy that offers the greatest health co-benefits. Now, if we look at the last few months, during the lockdown, walking and cycling have come to a new prominence, because it was realized that these means of transportation can provide the necessary physical distance that we are recommending of at least 1 meter between people, but also help people to remain physically active, which is particularly important when normal activities are restricted because of lockdown measures. There is, however, an additional important benefit, and it is one of allowing a better distribution of the modal shares, so that, for example, we can relieve the pressure and crowding of public transportation, making it available to those who really need to use that, because for them, for example, the travel commuting distances would be too long to be covered walking and cycling. So this is why we have seen so many cities all around the world making important investments into improving their infrastructure for cycling and walking. You may wonder why doing so when in any case transport was so much lower, motorized transport was at much lower level. Well, there are two reasons for that. One of them is that we didn't want, and nobody wanted, the increase of cycling and walking to happen with parallel increases in injuries. A health system that must put all its efforts into fighting COVID-19 should not be burdened with extra patients who need to be cared for because they are victims of road traffic injuries. And the other reason has been, as I've just explained, to facilitate the uptake of cycling and walking, but by as many people as possible, so that the public transportation could become less crowded and therefore continue to perform in the safest possible way its vital function within cities. We also have to bear in mind that developing infrastructure for cycling and walking, when compared to developing infrastructures, for example, like highways or like underground rail systems, may happen within a time frame and at a cost which is significantly short. So we can make a visible change and a sizable change within a much shorter period of time and with a comparatively lower investment of taxpayer money. Promoting cycling and walking, however, and active mobility and the easing of public transportation needs to be accompanied by a complex set of additional measures. First and foremost, facilitating and creating conditions for people to be able to telework and study from home, for example. We need also to create and to improve systems like e-commerce and home deliveries, so that people do not have a need to travel by car to do their shopping, for example, bulk shopping. We also need to maintain on managing the demand for private transport, because of course we cannot afford collectively the risk that if people are unable to travel safely by cycling, walking and public transport, they might have to resort back to private transportation. This is not a good scenario to see happening, because it would be really unsustainable. So closely related to these transport-related considerations are the urban planning ones. And here it is of prominence the emerging concept of the city of proximity, which means a city within which each one of us would be able to meet our essential needs for services, amenities, goods, within a walking or cycling distance. This is what in Paris has been translated into the city of 15 minutes, a place where we can go about and meet our needs very conveniently. This has also some important potential effects in terms of increasing urban resilience, because in the future, should there be a shock or an event of similar nature as the one that we have had with the COVID, we might be able to target preventive and containment measures more precisely only to the areas which are directly affected, without the need of imposing extended lockdowns on full cities. So the unfolding tragedy of COVID and the lockdown measures have also showed us that there can be, in parallel with a reduction of many economic activities, an increase and a significant improvement in the condition of the environment. This has been observed particularly in relation to the pollutants emitted from the transport sector. So now that the economies are to be restarted, now that the governments are deciding how to kick back and kick up their economies, the big question is, how can we do this in such a way that we can deliver, yes, economic recovery, but at the same time protect the health and improve the environment? This is the big question for the months to come and the years to come. And the decisions we are making now will lock us into, into future status quo for quite a long time. So we have now the moment to make the right decisions. To support this, WHO has been promoting a WHO manifesto for a healthy and sustainable recovery from COVID, which emphasizes the opportunities that we have to go forward better in a more sustainable way, including by looking at cities and building healthier, more livable cities. In addition, in Europe, the 56 member states of the Pan-European region are working together under the framework of the Transport, Health and Environment Pan-European Programme to develop the first ever European master plan for the promotion of cycling. This will be a very important new document that the member states hope to see adopted at the political level next year at the fourth level meeting on transport, health and environment. And its aim is to promote a very sizable increase and uptake of cycling all across Europe. So, in conclusion, active mobility is a cornerstone of sustainable urban development. It has multiple health and environmental benefits, and on top of what we already knew, it has additional important benefits in terms of strengthening our resilience vis-à-vis COVID. The lessons we have learned through these lockdown experiences are very important to pave the road towards a building back better approach and to a healthier, green and sustainable recovery. This is an unprecedented and not to be missed opportunity, so my last word is let's not waste it. And finally, let me close by thanking you all for your attention, and in particular my colleague and friend Dr. Manfred Neuen, who has led us through this session, is coordinating us today, and has brought us around this concept of fusion mobility. Thanks a lot. Arrivederci Trieste e buona giornata a tutti. Grazie.
Thank you to Francesca Raccioppi for her inspiring speech. She's not only walking the talk in the WHO, she's also a supporter of the PEP, Transport, Environment, Health Pan-European Program, a joint initiative of the WHO and the UNICE. For the second keynote, it's my pleasure to introduce you Manfred Neun, the principal of the Fusion Mobility Memmingen Institute. He is not only the father and the key player of fusion mobility, of this interdisciplinary fusion mobility development, he's also the convener of this session. Thanks, Manfred, for all the efforts taken. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia. And particular thanks to Francesca Raccioppi for her really inspiring keynote speech. As a session convener, it's my real pleasure and honor to welcome you all to this Fusion Mobility session. And as a speaker, I am now curious to share all the content, the good content of the concept with you, doing this in 5 steps. And let's start with the simple question, why do we need fusion mobility? Well, since almost half a century, we are now really working intensified for making sustainable development happen, even in transport and in sustainable mobilities. But the success is not as good as we want. Yesterday evening, we got well introduced the Trieste Declaration, which is a very, very important document, not only content-wise and in general, but also to adding to the call for rights, also calling for duties and responsibilities. We will contribute to this, and I will come back to this. And also now, why are we calling this fusion and fusion mobility? Well, on the one hand, it's about that fusion is a process or result of joining 2 or more things together to form a single new entity. And this is what we are doing. We are bringing all together what's content-wise in mobilities and form a new entity. And I will explain now how this can work. Firstly, it's about that we have these 6 buildings blocks covering all. And the first building block was already introduced and highlighted by Francesca Raccioppi, and in our panel, this will be continued by Ida Sabelis from the Free University in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. The basic understanding is to compare it with the passive mobility where we need fuels, and in this pyramid you also can see in the middle the hybrid solution, the e-mobility, which is mostly the e-bike. Furthermore, we have the second building block, public space and urban design, presented by Professor Xinwen Zhang from Taiwan. And this is all about the place we live, the city we want, the destinations we manage, and that spaces, in particular public spaces, matter. And the third building block about public and shared mobilities will be represented by Professor Sven Kesselring. He is also a keynote speaker, so you will learn more about him in the third keynote. And this topic is all about the increasing and fast emerging diversity of mobilities in this field. The fourth building block about the sustainability factors of mobilities, I will represent myself. And of course, this is about all the risks we know from these long-term risks outlook. Likelihood, we know that half of these risks are already from the environment. So it's absolutely now high time to go for a substantial transformation. And again, this is the right time also to call for the precautionary principle. In particular, when the things are threatening to human life or health on a long term and incredible to present or to present or future generations and imposed without adequate consideration of the human rights in total. So it's absolutely that we be aware and that we prevent our societies for what we can see and know already. This is why we are here at the ESOF in Trieste, really to make it happen, and we need the interdisciplinary collaborations to make it work. Building block number 4, represented by Herbert Tiemens from the city of Utrecht, and he will have the great examples to explain to us how vehicles and interlinked infrastructure can work and will work with best practice examples. And finally, it's my pleasure also to introduce building block 6, connected mobilities, represented by Moritz Neun from Vienna and Zurich, working in the field of big data, fusion data and artificial intelligence. You can be curious about the practical side of these issues as well as the real questions behind what it means for mankind, the risks, but also the opportunities. So, also let me mention that in addition to the building blocks, we are aware of all the hinterlands, and the hinterlands, to explain it just with the example of active mobility. There are human needs, human rights, data, sustainable mobility for all aspects. There's a sedentary society, there's energy sufficiency and other things in which are much bigger. But you see now the intersections where this all meet the first building block, active and passive mobility. So this is all about the hinterlands to cover even more and to widen the frames. Finally, and this is most important to make the systemic approach work, it's about the interactions between all the building blocks. Because if we would like to create proper and sustainable algorithms for the future, of course, we have to take all the parameters, all the needs, all the rights, all the aspects of all the building blocks in. Otherwise, this will not work, and it's great that we will here also have the contribution of the panel. Just to mention, it's essential that building block 1 and 2, the active modes and the public space, have really a close interaction, or that we be aware of that we will not feed the learning machines with all the important things and parameters from all the other building blocks. The learning machines will not be keen and take care of what's essential for human needs and rights. And finally, from the sustainability aspect, yes, we have really to bring in all, which is not covered directly on sustainable matters in all the other building blocks. For example, we found out that cycling is contributing to 15 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, this is a high impact we have to bring forward, absolutely. This year, we already used the system also at the ECOM conference in Cascais to evaluate, to make a kind of assessment about several contributions, to look what's covered already in this groundbreaking new research. And you also can see that sometimes there are a little bit weak points in the first and fourth building block. So the system already works. It's an ideal system. Of course, we have to fill it with content. That's very clear. But now we can use it even more and even better to get knowledge, to better knowledge and understanding of all the approaches that were used from decision makers during the last half century. Very often we meet, as you can see in the first two lines, that all about architecture and city planning is divided from transport and mobility planning. This cannot work, sorry. A step forward you can see with Todd and Hott, and also the groundbreaking contributions of the early Jan Gale frame to bring more in. This is covering more. This is covering already 4 of the building blocks. That's a great step forward. And when you are looking now to this second slide, you can see in the middle right hand the age of the car. the car-centric frame. Hello, come on. This is exactly what we have to overcome. And you see, this is focusing on a single part. This is a strong pleading now to take all the other aspects in and to make the interaction work. Otherwise, we will not be able to succeed with sustainable development. Okay, we see other steps forward with the mass frame, with the autonomous vehicle frame. Here we have to be a little bit careful because they are covering 4 fields already, maybe even 5, but they are occupying and they are not really bringing it on a cooperative level with all the other modes of transport. This is another strong aspect and argument to prioritize active mobility to make sustainable mobilities work. What we need is, first of all, to unleash the impact of the SDGs, and with the SUMP, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, already now in the 2nd generation on the European level, you can see that all the 6 building blocks are recognized. Not always the interactions are already being built up systemically, and so the next step forwards will be what we are able to draft here now with the Fusion Mobility Frame. So, and here, just in a final overview, you can see what we can overcome when we use all the impact presented. So, this is the way to go. This is the way to use the ideal systems. So we are able to draft new frames, to widen the frames, to invest in interdisciplinary collaborations. I'm very glad that I'm also today are now working together with such engaged colleagues to make this all works. Thanks to all of you who are contributing to this great work in progress. And we will combine this with an open call for prioritizing active mobility. I will come back to this at the very end, and this is good luck. And I discovered this already now, yesterday evening, when it was introduced in the plenary here at the ESOF, that this is really closely linked to the Trieste Declaration. This is promising. This will pay off to join the forces and to bring all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manfred. Your introduction to fusion mobility would be good for an entire semester. Maybe this can also be the case with Sven Kessering. He was professor at the University of Munich and of Copenhagen, and now is the Dean of the Master Course on Sustainable Mobilities in Nürtingen, Geislingen University, Baden-Württemberg. Sven, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I just thank you very much for inviting me for this exciting session and to be on this conference. I actually wanted to be there in place, but my university doesn't allow us to travel right now. So one contribution to sustainability, definitely, but it also has a couple of disadvantages. I just want to underline what Manfred said before, and I just want to put this a little bit in a historical perspective, and to underline that we're actually not talking about fusion mobility because this is a funky term, or this is kind of a fashion, or it's nice to talk about this, or it's in line with what is currently discussed. It's a development that has a logic, it has a direction, it has a significance in changing, in the end, also the modern world and the modernity we're living in. So authors like Ulrich Beck or Jeremy Rifkin, they actually put it pretty clearly, and they say we are moving from an industrial modernity into a digital modernity. So from large-scale solutions like trains to transport a lot of people from one place to the other, to more individualized solutions like cars, automobiles, of course embedded in large-scale technical systems. Like the system of automobility is not only, it's not really individualized. So we're talking about a very powerful system with infrastructure, technologies, and all these aspects. But we're actually moving into a phase, into a digital modernity with diversified solutions. platforms, with digital ephemeral machines that we hardly can see. We travel around with these machines, and they are making it possible to get connected while we are on the move. But we are also, and this session is an example for that, we are also have the opportunity to stay put and being present at a different place, being part of a discussion, being present together with other people somewhere else. So we talked about mobility networks and platforms, if we look back into that conflict, and we are still talking about a lot of conflict, but nevertheless, we are actually also there in a process of transition, of transformation from the industrial modernity, where it was all about finding the perfect solution, the optimum solution. Is it public transport, or is it automobility or individualized transport? This was the big question, and the attempt just to purify, to annihilate other solutions, and to say the car, for example, is the perfect answer on the modern question. How can we get connected and stay in touch with other people somewhere else? In the second, like, transition phase, I call that transition phase, is we accepted that there are at least two ways of doing it, either public transport or private transport. But we're also in a phase right now, specifically COVID-19 is one of the topics, climate change, also social disintegration through the way how we build cities, the way how we connect things together, that we are actually getting more and more aware of the dominance of negative side effects of these things. So the negative side effects of the car-centered city. And today, or in the future even more, we're going to normalize that there is not one best way to solve this problem. It's multiple best ways that are actually connected with each other. So fusion mobility, just to get back to this term, brings exactly this thinking together, that micro-mobilities, sharing mobilities, active, the new relevance of active mobility, mobility as a transport, together with public transport, together with individualized automobile transport, is getting an integrated system, is fusing there's a fusion process going on. And I think we are still not at the place where we actually represent that on the organizational structure. Just one short example, Munich is now opening up a department for mobility, where they bring together all the aspects in one department. This is absolutely the right way of doing it, but this is not yet the reality in a lot of cities. We're talking about blurring boundaries. We're talking about blurring boundaries between what is public, what is private, what is shared mobility. And we're talking about that finally, I need to say, the product is mobility. It's about mobility. It's about increasing the mobility potential for people and increasing the potential for sustainable mobility, instead of selling cars, selling bikes, selling scooters, and building the infrastructures around them, diversified and differentiated in a way. So mobility is the product, and this is the right direction to move on. It's a huge process of differentiation. This is fast, steady, unstoppable, and mobility fusion between public, private, and shared transport will be the reality in the future. As my colleagues from Berlin, from the Science Research Center in Berlin say, the use of digital technologies in order to economize the mobility sector, making it more efficient and intermodal, cannot be stopped. The automobile with its combustion engine was only the first generation appliance. Its broad success, however, has forced us to consider alternatives and reinterpret the product with the help of digital technologies. But coming back to the term of conflict, of course, even if we accept the new reality of multiple best ways, multiple modes of transport, which are actually demanding for the right to the city, demanding the right to contribute to the solution of sustainable mobility, we have a lot of struggle over diversity. And As it says here, scooters are invading San Francisco. They are invading Trieste. They are invading Munich and a lot of other places. And why am I talking about invading? Because we're talking about messing up the order, messing up the taken for granted structures and ordered system that we have. I live in Copenhagen, and I have to do with a lot of people in Sweden. Sweden has this very clearly structured way of doing. There's road traffic, there is bike traffic, there is pedestrians. It's all separated from each other in different departments. So as I said, the example from Munich, I think is the right way to go, to bring this into an integrated system or integrated concept. Manfred asked me to talk about culture and mobility culture. And very often we think culture, this is this kind of soft aspect. There's nothing harder than to change culture. We can change technical systems, we can change technologies in general, but changing culture is the hardest job to do. And we are right now in the process of changing from a system of automobility to a system of fusion mobility or integrated mobility. There are many levels, from the local level to the international level, part of this. And what we need to see is that the like embedding the idea of fusion mobility, or that different modes of transport have to be planned, have to be developed, have to be conceptualized together, is a process that happens on very different places. We very often, when we talk about culture, we think that we have to change mobility practice. Yes, that's true, but this is not the only case. I think it's a political transformation process. It's a transformation process in innovation and technology. It's the whole socio-technical innovation environment that is in the background, but it's also the way how we talk about it. And I'm coming back to the scooters. The scooters are now the object of annoyance and a lot of anger also, but the scooters represent the new logic of organizing mobility in the future, and not separating it or purifying the system towards a specific mode of transport. And this is also part of public discourse, the way how we talk about it, the media coverage, movies, films, art and music, all these things are part of the transformation process. I think what I'm saying is, when we think about changing it towards sustainable mobility cultures, we need to take this into account. Conclusions. We need to accept the diversities of mobility. Urban planning, research and development, strategic planning, and the development of business models need to leave the silos of either public or private transport. This also implies new forms of collaboration. Fusion mobility needs experts in network thinking and developing. This calls us specifically at the universities and in the companies for new forms of education and training. What we need is smart urbanism rather than smart cities. Everybody talks about smart cities and smart technologies and artificial intelligence and all that. Yes, but this is only half of the way towards sustainable mobility. It needs new culture of collaboration, new political culture. There is no one best way to sustainable mobility. We can't replace the automobile by something else. Automation, and this is right now, this is the guinea pig of mobility discussions. The automation is not the answer to the question, but maybe one sensible element in an integrated in a fusion mobility concept. Fusion mobility is a pathway to integrated mobilities, and in that sense, I'm really happy to be part of this discussion today and this session, because I think we are talking about developing a mindset, developing a framework where we can put this in, and where all the individual measures and the building blocks, as Manfred calls it, make sense and get its place in an integrated system. Thank you very much for your attention and for the commitment. I want just one last thing to say before I'm ending. Manfred and I'm one of the co-editors of this journal, Applied Mobilities, and we discussed that this would actually be worthwhile to have a special issue in a journal. And I can't promise that it's going to be there because we have to discuss that with the other co-editors. But I think the topic makes perfectly sense in this, and Manfred will launch a call during the next couple of weeks. And please get in touch with us if you're interested, and we're looking forward to have this put into a journal in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sven. Please remain with us for the panel. I would be curious to hear more from you on the transition, and in particular on the speed we need of this transition to meet the ambitious goals set by the European Green Deal. But now let me invite all the speakers of the panel. We will follow the structure of the fusion mobility building blocks presented by Manfred Neunt. Each panelist will represent a building block. The first question, addressing all of you, is what makes you proud to represent your building block? Building block 1, active and passive mobility, Ida Sabelis.
Yes, thank you. What makes me proud? Where shall I start? I only have 2 minutes. Let me pick something. Francesca has already elaborated on active mobility in a very elaborate and very deepening way. But from my perspective as a social scientist with an interest in time and space and diversities, I think it's important to rethink what hinders active mobility to become more prominent. And we're a fine panel here, so I hope that especially a lot of people who are watching now will join in, because I'm from the Netherlands and I'm a cycle activist as well. And active mobility departs from mobility, for me, in terms of human measures. And as Manfred already has highlighted, the point is at the moment, in terms of power and influence, it's passive mobility that is absolutely dominant. So my question always is, how can we proceed to make active mobility more prominent? And in the Netherlands, that is taken as under terms like human-powered mobility. And in the Netherlands, everything seems okay, but still, for instance, in our discourses and in our ways of talking, we find that there is still the dominance of the car-centered policies, practices, and discourses in just about everywhere, in science, in policy making, and so on and so forth. So my contribution here is rethinking, especially the way we talk about mobilities in order to gradually reverse the importance of active mobility and diminish the influence of passive mobilities. That's it for now for me in a 2-minute speech.
Building block number 2, public space and urban design, Xinwen Chang.
Hello, everyone. This is Xinwen speaking from Taiwan. So about the question 1 for BB2, the public space, I would like to have some brief for you. The population of Taiwan is 23 million people with more than 15 million cars and 6 million motorcycles. And the land size is 36,000 square meters, just the same as Netherlands, which you can see in Taiwan, it's a high density in living space. So there is a very unique characteristic in land use in cities of Taiwan, which is mixed land use. So due to the lacking of land area, mixed land use makes city life more efficient in terms of human demand, fusion together, working, living, leisure, and so on. So for example, there are shops and restaurants on the ground floor, and then second floor of office. And upper floors may be all residents. So you can go shopping, walking, and living in same block without driving cars, only by active mobility. So there are two new examples in Taiwan. One is from Hsinchu, where I live now. The other is from Tainan, which is my hometown. The first case of Hsinchu, there are pedestrian bikeway along the canal. So we integrate the transportation planning and urban design together, make it like blue belt and green belt. The second case is of Tainan. We reallocated spaces by using the urban regeneration method and the zoning transfer. So we're knocking down the old building to become public space with fountain, playground for children, young family, and everyone enjoy very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Xinwen. Building block number 3, public and shared mobility. Sven.
Well, I'm not sure if proud is the right word, but I'm actually really pleased to see that finally what we talk about for many years, I'm not saying decades, that the new logic of organizing cities, public space, mobility in the big picture is emerging, is coming to the fore, is coming into reality and is shaping the cities. I think one of the positive impacts of COVID-19 is also that we are now changing, or that we can see that a lot of things in cities are actually happening in a pace, in a speed that we wouldn't have expected 10 years ago. I mentioned already this new Department of Mobility, but also all these struggles about road space is changing very fastly. They take away in cities like Copenhagen, Munich. They bring in some kind of new experimental mobility culture in that, and sharing mobility, and the blurring boundaries between public mobility and sharing mobility is an indicator for that. I mentioned the scooters, but it's also all the sharing systems. And the other thing, one aspect, is that we can see a lot of attention is actually focusing on what companies do. If the business models work, like car sharing from BMW, Daimler, big companies. But what we can see when we put more sociological and social scientist investigation on it, that the new logic is actually coming up and is kind of getting embedded in everyday cultures. People can solve problems for themselves, even if they are living in places where they are not like being served by a perfect public transport system. They can find solutions on their own because they are initiating new networks of organizing, like cargo bikes, like car sharing, bike sharing, etc. So what I'm saying with that is that we actually this cultural change that I talked about before is actually happening. I worked for many years with Ulrich Beck, the German sociologist, and he always said, when things are really happening and changing, then they change in places where we don't expect them to be. What we need, and this also comes together with what was mentioned about Jan Gill's perspectives. We just need to look into what is happening in society, and then we see that there is a new pattern, a new form of organizing mobility that is rising, that is actually developing itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sven. Building block 4, factors of sustainability in mobilities. Manfred.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me start by saying that I'm just grateful that I was able as a young student to learn about sustainability and what it needs. It was the time of the Meadows Report, Club of Rome, and so on. And I have to confess, now, almost 5 decades later, I'm still a beginner. I'm learning day by day. But I also can confess it's not boring, it's not frustrating. Okay, sometimes there are short moments where I realize, hey, why are we so slow? Why does it take so much time, lots of time, to come forward, to discover what is essential? I needed, during the last 10 years, I needed more than 10 years to discover that we have to prioritize active mobility. We have the evidence for this from many points of views, but just to ask for prioritizing, this needed a long time. Maybe the only explanation and excuse is what we learned from Daniel Kahneman about slow and fast thinking, or the other way around, fast and slow thinking. So this is, of course, a matter of slow thinking, no doubt about this. But to invest now in sustainable mobilities, not only reducing the non-sustainable issues, but building up sustainable mobilities from bottom up as a system that works. This is really a great perspective. So let's go on being a learner.
Thank you. Building block 5, vehicles and interlinked infrastructure. Herbert Tiemens.
Yes, thank you, Julia. From Utrecht, I would say I'm really proud that we have already learned from a past crisis in the 1970s, when we had the oil crisis in the Netherlands, and also a crisis in social trust from the government. People didn't trust the government because people were killed in the street, and a lot of children were killed in the streets, and there was activism. And people in the Netherlands, they learned, or the government learned to listen to people, and they changed cities more or less in these kind of fusion mobility, as it is now called. We are working already to make walking and cycling more active, more progressive in the cities. And what we see is in this recent COVID-19 crisis, we didn't have to adjust that much. The system as it is already rather resilient. People could walk and cycle in the streets. Well, of course, we have to fiddle a bit with the traffic lights, and we have to fiddle a bit, but if we compare it to the other cities like Berlin or like Brussels, we are pretty prepared to adapt our system. Nevertheless, it is still the question, are we talking about traffic, are we talking about mobility, or are we talking about a better city for everyone, which is much more important for me than the mobility itself. So, thank you.
Thank you. Building block 6, connected mobility, Moritz Neun.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, when we talk about connected mobility and also artificial intelligence, technological advances, there's a fast pace at the moment, but the human factor is very often forgotten, because there's this ambition of solving current problems in the few modal transportation, and it actually gives away the opportunities of a holistic approach, which can leverage all transport means, which will be also able to take into account what active mobility can do. Because for sustainable mobility, we need to optimize on all resources, and not only like the single transportation mode or the space or the energy, but this is really a holistic problem. And this is also where I believe artificial intelligence is a game changer, because it's not, and this is very important, it's not about automated driving or improving driver safety. it's actually a very powerful approach, which can do decision support, which can with that one also help on understanding what the city does, what the people need, what the actual also the data is we have and we use, because in the data we also have ingrained our culture, our understanding, our needs and behaviors, and since artificial intelligence lives on data, all this is contained in there, and so it's not only about getting access to data for developing new decision support tools, new mobility solution, but it's also very, very important to have an understanding of what this data contains, what the culture is we have in the data, what the bias is, what the problems are, and how we actually also wanna change them on the way forward. And this means that the owners and the communities and the users, like the researchers, they need to be talking and understanding and having the same understanding of the data. We have seen that in the recent few years with image data, with text data happening a lot, and this has really shown great advances. We now need to do the same on transportation and mobility data. And this, I think, with this fusion mobility is really about fusion data, and that's a very good starting point. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So the second question to all of you. What interaction would you like to highlight? So what is the value of the systematic interaction in the fusion mobility scenario? Building block 1, Ida.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm very happy with all the building blocks already. What I would like to highlight is that it's very important to look at who has an influence where, and to really stress the importance of the building blocks all being very balanced. After all, engaged research is about who defines what type of mobility is where. I'm very I'm very happy with Sven's contribution in that, because my experience is that it's all about cultures, where a lot of planning and mobility has its own culture in terms of interdisciplinarity and science. And having all these disciplines as today together means that we can really look at cultures. What informs artificial intelligence? What informs spatial planning? What informs engineering? Some old research on the internet and web-based computerization or have shown that it's very important who defines the building blocks that we set out with. And if engineers define that, you will get an engineering outcome, so to speak. So it's very important to really look at cultures in terms of power processes. Who defines the ways we are going to develop things? And I mean, active mobility is one of those building blocks. Who defines what is active and what is not? Who defines how we can overcome the car-centered perceptions that are so taken for granted in all our cultures? So it's very important to really gradually and slowly and very patiently proceed in terms of who has a say where and what types of discourses come together in all those disciplines. That's it for now.
Thank you. Building block 2, public space and urban design, Shinwen.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. So can you hear me? Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, so after I introduced 2 cases from Taiwan, now I would like to introduce another case. It's start from Taipei, the capital city, but now it's all over Taiwan. It's our U-Bike. We integrate the transportation planning and the urban design in the very early beginning. So it's very good to create new urban space with U-bike. And in recently, the U-bike public bike scheme is quite success in Taiwan, not only in capital city Taipei, but also the other cities was influenced a lot. And it's getting very popular, and also some Southeast Asia countries, they also came, last year, they came to Taiwan to want to case study or learn about it. So moreover, there has been electronic supporting public bike system in Taipei now, and the new plan since this year. So because of the electronic supporting public bike, the government can also collect more big data and use the hotspots to plan more attractions for not only domestic tourists, but also for tourists. So the e-bike encourage more tourists to cycle and enjoy the capital city, Taipei. And I think this is a very good example of the green tourism with the different fields. Big data, AI, green transportation, and tourism altogether. And so finally, I just want to say, I hope we can see each other soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to building block 3, public and shared mobilities. Sven.
Yeah, I would like to push a little bit more into Ida's direction too. I think instead of thinking about what is the most relevant collaboration with other building blocks, I think I would like to emphasize that what I think makes the fusion mobility concept distinct from other concepts that are in the air in the discussion about smart cities, artificial intelligence, the future of mobility, is that it puts the human scale in the center. So the question is, what is all the fuss about? So why are we talking about all these things? And why are we talking about, as Moritz actually emphasized, why are we talking about artificial intelligence now in relation to mobility? What does it? What can it do? That I think putting the human, the individual, the citizen, and the end user of mobility services, of mobility systems in the center of this, we develop criteria of why is to evaluate the worth and the benefits for society in a specific way, because what we need to be aware, and I think this is also what I see in this concept of fusion mobility, is that by redesigning, reconfiguring mobility systems towards sustainability or the future, we're also redesigning the society in some ways, because this is the way we only, as human beings, we only have two ways to interact with other people: talking or meeting. And so we are working on the fundamentals of society with that. And I think this is what we need to take into account when we talk about fusion mobility or integrated transport, that we always need to think, instead of getting taken away from what is possible with new technologies, that we need to have criteria to decide what is a good path and what is a bad path.
Thank you. Building block 4, factors of sustainability in mobilities. Manfred.
Thank you. Well, interaction pays off, in my opinion, in the fusion mobility system. When we are following just the south of Sven, right, the human scale, and bringing it together with sustainable results. First of all, we have to acknowledge that reducing non-sustainable matters does not automatically lead to sustainability. but bringing the human factors and sustainable results as a development, an entire development together. Let's follow simply to explain the SDGs. The SDGs are a cornucopia of great abilities, and they are not isolated from each other. They are connected, they are overlapping, they are contributing to each other. And it's the same in the fusion mobility concept. You may say, okay, why do we need a separate building block for this? For example, health is already integrated in building block 1 in active mobility. But I can tell you there are many other aspects of the SDGs which are not represented in the other building blocks. For example, all the economic issues, all the energy issues, these we have to bring in separately. Even the SDG number 5 on gender balance is not represented well in all the others. So to be aware of all these additional aspects, yes, we need this building block, and this building block permanently must interact with all the others to generate, to come to the right algorithms we need for sustainable mobilities.
Thank you, Manfred. Building block number 5.
Yes.
Herbert,
well, to me,
vehicles
yes,
and interlinking infrastructure. Herbert.
Yeah, for the infrastructure, I would say it's really interesting to figure out what attracts the politicians, because they have to shape the society in the way that the people are demanding it. And what we see now for active mobility is that we in the Netherlands, we have now the super cycle routes, the cycling highways, as it is called, as it attracts a lot of attention, while we know that local mobility in the neighborhoods is much more enabling for people. So we have to stress that mobility should be accessible for everyone, and not for the high-speed cyclists only who have their special designed bicycles, for instance. For me, that's the big challenge. How do we make active mobility mainstream, of course with the levers from the high-speed cycling forerunners, but also to make it mainstream for what is truly important for a local society that is based on proximity, what's based on social interactions, which go on slow speed and on staying at your same place. Thank you.
Thank you, Herbert. So building block 6, connected mobility. Moritz.
So, thank you. Ida and Sven, they already actually started looking at those human factors and how that plays together with technology. And I want to really emphasize that, of course, AI and technology, it's a lot about data. And when we talk about data these days, there's always, of course, like also talking about challenges and lots of dangers. And this is not only about privacy and aspects and that kind, but since we are talking now about optimizing and shaping how transportation is done, the data also contains all the biases, all the culture we have. Car-centric is very likely very much ingrained in the data and the planning, what would be used for those future decision support, future mobility systems. And here really we need to make sure that we understand that and we bring the human factor into those aspects. And this really relates both to active mobility and to public and shared mobilities. And in the same way also actually for public space and for urban planning, urban design, again, here also like the culture is probably very, very much in the data. So this needs to be understood and prevented in that sense. On the other hand, not so much about the data, but actually seeing artificial intelligence as a decision support. in those optimization functions, we usually talk about a reward function. So what's the reward function to actually get sustainable? Basically, building block 4 needs to also make sure that we actually get to the next level of understanding and of defining this reward function for a real sustainable mobility. And finally, obviously, also like building block 5, infrastructure vehicles, there's always a permanent interaction, because this one, in a way, is a major influencer between the digital virtual world and what's actually possible on the ground and in the physical world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your stimulating answers. And now let's hear about the questions from the remote audience. Lorraine Darcy, the floor is yours.
So hi, everyone. We actually don't have any questions from the audience as it stands, but I've written a few here myself. I'm considering myself the audience here. And something that a few people have mentioned, and it's kind of been inherent in what people have said, is this that we have to communicate with the decision makers. The decision makers, we know these things, and we can talk amongst ourselves about these things and have really informed discussions. But how do we communicate that message best to decision makers? And in particular, a challenge we have here in Ireland is communicating it to local decision makers. About that when we're talking about that smaller scale and that community, the difference between that human scale versus the architecture, as I call it, at that local scale. So any thoughts on that?
That's a great answer. Thanks a lot for this, Lorraine. Well, I'm sure that all the 6 of us have different aspects they can really add to this great question. From my point of view and the experiences I got during more than 12 years in Brussels, to reach and to convince decision makers, we need 3 things. They like strategies that are high level on costs or low costs, but they do not really like those in between. So it must be terribly expensive or it must be for free. But sustainable development as a thing growing up from bottom up is not for free, but is really cost effective. So this is a first challenge that is just in the middle. This we have to overcome. To overcome this, we need 2 other things. The 2 other things are, firstly, we need a good strategy, and a good strategy always must be content-based, and therefore we are investing in this content development. It's ongoingly work in progress. And secondly, we need official calls, we need public agendas, and therefore I will come back at the end again to the Trieste Declaration, and I will come back to our open call, because we need these agendas to reach the decision makers. But it's a transparent system what we are offering, and due to this transparent system, they all are able to follow what we are doing. And this is maybe the 3rd important issue. Decision makers are normal people. They must understand. From science we have to deliver, but we also have to make it understandable.
No, absolutely. Anybody else on that? Ada?
Yes, can I just insert a little information here? Only 2 months ago in the Netherlands, a book appeared by a journalist and a psycho professor of the University of Amsterdam, and translated, its title is about the prevalence of speed. And what the book does in a very simple journalist manner is highlighting how active mobility is actually downplayed all the time. And with that, it highlights the options and the possibilities and all kind of trivial examples of how we can spread word, so to speak. I'm hitting here at Manfred's idea that politicians and policymakers are just normal people. I think we need normal language and normal examples to address fusion mobility, active mobility, and all that. It's normal things like signs on the road that say, cyclists step down of your cycle and walk around the roadworks. You would never find that for car drivers. Get out of your car and push. You know, it's that very simple examples. And in that book, and I learned from Talia Verkade, who is the first author and a journalist, I learned that it's about to be translated into English. And I think it's that kind of examples that we really need for normal language, trivial examples for people to highlight where the awareness is for alternative mobilities.
I would like to say something to that and add a very practical example. I was talking a lot about the changes in the system of automobility. In Baden-Württemberg, where my university is based, close to Stuttgart, in that region, we have now a strategy dialogue, the transformation of the automobile industry. I'm part of a board where we talk about innovation and technology, future of innovation and technology and research. I think these processes where all these like transformations are actually getting to a new level, that car producers are sitting together with governments, with stakeholders of all kinds of provenance or provenance. This is important places where we need to bring in this perspective. So we've been like discussing that it's not enough to think about new production systems or automation in car production and new mechanical engineering systems. We also need to talk about research that focuses specifically on the human scale. So what is the part of civil society in that transformation? So that mobility practice, industrial policies, technology policies, economic policies, they are being discussed together. So the exercise that we are trying here today to bring all these aspects together also happens in this more discursive processes that are going on. And I think it's really important that we actually bring ourselves into these processes. Because it's so easy to get taken away from the fascination of new technologies. But this is not going to solve the problem.
I would also like to add actually to that, because I think like the technology, of course, is fascinating, but the technology also aligns very often to things we already know or can envision as human people. So what we have seen, we believe in, and also translating to that normal language being used to explain people what actually might be possible. I was talking about decision support systems, simulating how traffic, how intermodal transportation and all that could work. I also believe that we need to kind of bridge that gap at the moment. Very often, like transportation planning in cities is done with very complex tooling in an ununderstandable fashion for the public and as well for the normal people, which are the decision makers. So here there would be some potential to actually also work on technologies to simulate, to explain, to tell people how the status quo actually might work differently with interconnected and all transport means, starting with active mobility. I think there's not enough shiny, not enough good visualization, explanation, simulation of those kinds of effects.
So we do have a question from the audience now, and it is, how can we deal with limited urban space? So different modes need different lanes to grant safety to active mobility, especially in main streets. Different modes have different speeds and needs. And how do we deal with micromobility as well in order to reduce conflicts between pedestrians, cyclists, micromobility users and car drivers? Anyone? Okay,
I'm not
Herbert?
sure if I really got the question.
it's a good question, and I think it is also a question that makes it's based on the thinking of mobility as a way of transport. While when we think of human scales, then automatically the speeds go down. Otherwise, you cannot meet each other in the streets, and you cannot have the interaction between each other. So when you slow down, there's no demand of different spaces for different kind of mobilizations. Everyone shares the road, but that means that you really have to reduce the speeds of cars, and then they will, car drivers, they will evaporate because they will walk. And that's much better. That's active.
Thank you very
Maybe
much.
Also, sorry, also exactly to this the same topic, and I think it's in line with what I tried to say earlier, is that of course there's a strong focus on every transport mode needs his own lane in order to have a functioning system. But this is exactly what I was trying to refer to as also maybe it's not every time the case, but we are just lacking the tools, the language to actually explain and simulate that. And just looking at my hometown in Zurich at the moment, there's a very expensive, in a way, experiment being run to just close down a few lanes and see what's happening. This is, of course, one way of making that process understandable, but maybe technology could also help there. But for making those simulations and all that, I think we are still also lacking a lot of data, because at the moment this is car-centric.
Thank you very much. Let's move to the last question to everybody. Your takeaway from this session in one sentence, please. Let's start with building block 1, active and passive mobility. Ida Sabines.
My takeaway is that through this discussion, I have become far more optimistic, because this is a genuinely transdisciplinary crowd. And if this is possible just within a couple of weeks to bring us together and have a discussion like this, it makes me very optimistic, not just about this crowd, but also about the possibilities outside. Thank you.
Building block 6, connected mobility. Moritz, one sentence.
Yes, so I can second Ida on that I'm actually really looking forward that like sustainability and those factors actually work well across all the 6 building blocks, and technology here is one aspect that should that can actually help and is very well interconnected.
Great. Building block 2, Xin-Wen, one sentence. Your takeaway.
Thank you, Julia. So my takeaway today is for future mobility, connected and human, we targeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I think the future mobility plays the key role for the future. Thank you. And I miss you all. I want to be really active mobility.
Thank you very much, Xin-Wen. Building block 5, Herbert.
Well, my takeaway is that for now, it is really good that what we are doing at this moment, but there's also momentum to move on. And despite it's Sunday, I'm willing to go to work to do more on it. As Ida said, I'm really positive about these opportunities that we have now. Thank you.
Thank you. Then building block 3, Sven, and after it, building block 4, sustainability. Please, Sven, then continue with the wrap-up, and Manfred with the closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all change starts with language. So we need to have the language, we need to have the words, otherwise nothing is going to change, because then we stay in the old concepts. And what I'm taking away from this session today is that we actually even if the backgrounds, the disciplinary backgrounds, are quite different. So we are starting from very different perspectives, from sociology, from planning, from engineering, from economics, and so forth. But I'm quite surprised, positively surprised, how high is actually the consensus, and that we can actually agree on a specific perspective and a specific prioritization of issues in this very, honestly, very almost overly complex topic that we are dealing with. This is also my wrap up of the session. So I think it's basically what we did today is and again, I agree absolutely with Ida at this point. I'm really positive about the opportunities of moving this on. This experiment that we tried today to bring us all together. Most of us, well, I haven't sit together with any one of you, but Manfred so far. But I think we can agree on a lot of things, and this is maybe it's also an indicator what I said before at the beginning of the session. This is the transformation. This is the normalization of what will be the future of that we can agree on this consensus. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ago, the discussion would have been quite differently. In that sense, very positive wrap up of this. I don't know if it's a wrap up, but it's a concluding remark.
Thank you very much, Sven, and I can continue directly what you explained about the diversity of our different disciplines, and I also enjoy the diversity of the academic, the researchers, and the practical issues in all together. This is really a great advantage, and we are using this in a very constructive way, working intensified now on this issue, fusion mobility, to bring in all the diverse aspects. I also realized right now that other questions are now popping up we are not able to answer to due to the restrictions of time, but we will take the questions with us and we will try to answer them in the written chat afterwards, if possible. So my takeaway clearly is mobility is a diverse issue. And of course, we need also the diversity and complexity in working on this issue to take all the aspects in, to make sustainable development possible. And this is promising. This brings us forward. And this is also the reason why we are intended and highly motivated to contribute to the European Green Deal. This is why we will send to the European Commission what you can see here in the slide as an open call for prioritizing active mobility. This can become the trigger, as Ida pointed out. And thank you also, Ida, for questioning the normal people. What we are missing is not that they are normal. What we are missing, what many people, many voters are missing in these days simply is that the politicians really are able to explain their own view of the world, and at the same time that they respect what we are able to deliver from science to make their work well-paced and balanced. This is what we have to work on. And in this sense, I'm so grateful, thanks to Trieste. I would like to say thank you also to the Trieste Declaration to add to the call for our human rights, the call for duties and responsibilities. We are able, we are keen, we are grateful and proud to deliver to this entire development. It's really on the one hand that transport is the great sinner in sustainable development. But on the other hand, what we were able to explain briefly today is that sustainable mobilities are a most promising issue. sustainable mobilities will pay off. And as Sven Kesselring explained, we are with this approach of fusion mobility on a pathway to sustainable development. Thanks to all who are contributing on this great issue. Thanks to all of you also for let's going on the discussions and the debates. We are still at the beginning, but we are at the beginning of a much better world and a much better future. Thank you very much.